Okay, level 2, multiplying integers, decimals, and fractions. So we're still working with positive and negative numbers and fractions and decimals, but we're going to be multiplying now. So in A, you've got negative 4 times 6, and note that you've got a negative times a positive number. This result will always be a negative. So if you have negative 4 times 6, think just what's 4 times 6, that's 24. But since one of them is negative, your answer is going to be negative. And when you have a negative times a negative, like in B, you got a positive 24. So if you have a negative times a positive, that equals a negative. Or if it's flipped around, it means the same thing. But obviously a positive times a positive will equal positive. A negative times a negative will equal a positive as well. So same sign will equal positive, different signs, negative. Okay, when you're multiplying with mixed fractions or mixed numbers, okay, or fractions in general, what you want to do is you want to multiply the numerators together and then the denominators together. But you can only do that if you have two improper fractions. So in C, you've got 4 times 2, which is 8, plus 1 is 9, times 12 over 5. So with fractions, when you're multiplying, you don't need common denominators. You can multiply straight across. 9 times 12, let's see. Again, if you need to write this off to the side, you can. 9 times 2 is 8. Carry the 1. 9 times 1 is 9. So it's 108 because we added the 1 to the 9. So I got 108. And then 2 times 5 is 10. And then just see if you can simplify this. And now you can simplify this before you multiply. It might be a little bit easier. But if you forgot, just think 108 and 10. Well, both of those numbers are even. So if I cut 10 in half, that becomes 5. If I cut 108 in half, and here's how I'm going to tell you to cut 108 in half. Think about 100. What's half of 100? Okay, that's 50. And then what's half of 8? It's 4. So 54 is half of 108. Okay, how would you simplify this before you multiplied? Well, if you look, you can always simplify up and down with fractions. You can also simplify on the diagonal as long as you're multiplying. You can't do this when you're adding, but you can do this when you multiply. So if you notice 12 and 2, you can simplify those. 12 gets down to a 6. 2 gets down to a 1. So then you notice 9 times 6, hey, that's 54. Then 1 times 5, that's 5. Okay, now moving on to something a little bit trickier. Here we've got decimals. Well, we got one decimal, 1%, but we're going to turn this percentage into a decimal by moving over the decimal place twice. So really my problem is 15.35 times 0.12. Now with addition and subtraction, you always need to line up the decimal place. With multiplication, it's okay if it doesn't. What you want to always line things up is to the far right, so your last digit. So pretend like this was just a 0.10. What you would want to do, well, you'd still do 0.1. Bad example. So let's say this was like a totally different problem and say this was 0.5. You would just line up the 5 with the last digit with the 15.35, and it's okay that the decimal points are 2 off, or are 1 off. That's okay. So just a side note. Now, back to the problem. We have 0.12. So we're going to multiply just like we would. So we'd multiply 5 times 2, which is 10. So put down the 0, carry the 1. 2 times 3 is 6, carry the 1 is 7. 2 times 5 is 10, carry the 1. And 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. Okay, and I'm not going to worry about the decimals right now. So I'm going to leave it as 3070. Now when I move to this other place value, 1, I need to put in a 0 down here. And now I'm going to start. 5 times 1 is 5. 3 times 1 is 3. 1 times 5 is 5. And 1 times 1 is 1. Notice I'm not taking into account any of these 1s that I carried from the first time around when I multiplied by 2. That's a totally separate problem. Okay, so from here I'm just going to add up my columns. 0 plus 0 is 0. 7 plus 5 is 12. Carry the 1. 0 plus 3 is 3. Plus 1 is 4. 3 plus 5 is 8. And then a 1. Okay, so I hope you'll be able to tell that 15.35 times 0.12, which is smaller than 1, is not 18,420. What we need to do is we need to count the decimal places. So here's where aligning your decimal points come in very, very important. So in the 15.35, I'm going to start from the right. And I'm going to count 1, 2 until I get to a decimal point. So this one has 2. Same thing with the second one. You need to count those as well. So start from the far right and count until you see the decimal, until you get to the decimal. 1, 2. And the second one has 2. So when you do this, you add these up for a total of 4. And that's how many places you move into your final answer from the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 12%, that's so small, it's less than a quarter, is 1.842. You can put the 0 if you want it. You don't have to have it because it's the last digit after the decimal place. Okay? Alright, now using mental math to do this. So here's what I would do. In A, when I see 20 times a quarter, all I would do is I would think, okay, well, what's 20 divided by 4? That's 5. Okay, the other way I would think about this is how many quarters are in 2, that doesn't make sense. Never mind that. I would just do 20 divided by 4 because 20 times 1 divided by 4 is 5. I think that's the easiest way to do it without taking into account money. In B, when you have 20 times 0.6, as long as this ends in a 0, okay, you can do 2 times 6, which is 12, and that's what 0.6 times 20 is. And now what I would do with the 20%, this is my favorite trick. Okay, if you're ever at a restaurant and you need to tip, 20% is usually a good tip. So here's what I would do. I would find 10% first. How I would do that is I would move the decimal place over once to the left. So it's 1.535. That's 10%. To get 20%, you can multiply that by 2, or you can just add it to itself. So if you like multiplying, you can do that. If you like adding, you can do this too. That's 0, that's 7, that's 0, and that's 3. So $3.07 is what you should be tipping on a bill that's $15.35. Okay, that's my favorite trick. I use this all the time when I go out to eat. Move it over once and multiply it by 2.